I think the Canadian geese are pretty meme worthy because not only do they like attack people on the streets, they immigrate southward and attack people there too. So yeah, I think that could maybe get there.
Well, I
The
recall the goose was like a meme during the Freedom Convoy because of the Hong Kong stuff. So I think it is a good mascot and candidate.
I was attacked by geese as a child. Those things are dangerous. Those things are cobra chickens. All
I
right.
think that's a common childhood experience in Canada.
Yep.
They don't just bite you, they wing buffet you. They're really,
Yeah.
really brave creatures. All right. This is too much fun. We got to get into some heavy stuff. Let's get this thing started. Hey there, my name is Kris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I am honored to be here on True North with my dear friends Cosmin and Noah. Gentlemen, we've got a lot to go over. A lot of it is money related, and there is some good news. I'm insisting on plucking some good news out of this announcement. We just heard from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying that, surprise, everybody's going to get some relief on the GST, but only for 2 months. Let's listen.
Canadians been through a lot. They work hard. We see that. We've been able to get through the past couple of years. Everyone had to tighten their belts a little bit. Now we're going to be able to give a tax break for all Canadians. For 2 months, starting December 14th, we're going to remove the GST, HST from groceries. 100% of groceries, all groceries. We're going to remove the GST from restaurant meals, takeouts, fast food. Removing the GST from beer and wine. Removing the GST for essentials like kids' clothing, footwear, diapers, and toys. All tax-free. Removing the GST and HST. For 2 months, Canadians are going to get a real break on everything they do. We also know that there's more we need to do, particularly for working Canadians. So if you worked in 2023 and earned up to $150,000, we're going to be sending you a check for $250 in just a few months. Okay, so again, the good news. This is saving people money. Saving people money is always a good thing, especially this time of year. But a couple of things. Number one, that was a really long clip, and I apologize, dear listener, for you listening to that for that long. But we do have a second Trudeau clip coming up next, so brace yourself. But two, just a note, removing the GST from groceries, that usually doesn't fit. In very rare instances will you actually pay GST at the grocery store on food. Now, of course, grocery stores now sell everything, like can openers to video games. But for the actual foodstuffs, as they would say, you don't usually pay GST on that stuff. I think we actually have a picture of this. It's from the backdrop. If we can pull it up, guys. It's from the backdrop. So this is from the same announcement that you just saw the Prime Minister at, and it's just slightly out of frame. And if you zoom in here and look, you've got stuff there on the top right-hand side. That's bread, okay? You bottom kind of middle left, that's big bags of pasta. Okay, that doesn't carry GST. Like, I'll just point that out. Some of those things on there do, like the snacks and the cut up fruit, but most of that stuff does not carry GST right now. So it's just, again, one of those weird kind of tone deaf, disconnected moments of, do you guys really understand how much people are struggling? What did you guys think about this announcement? I'll start with you, Cosmin.
I think it's funny that he says Canadians need a break because the implication is, who do Canadians need a break from? And it's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his ballooning government that seems to extend into every aspect of the average citizen's life. And you're absolutely right. The undertones in this announcement for me were sort of cynical, opportunistic, and disingenuous, because all of a sudden the government cares about cutting taxes. This government that introduced the carbon tax on the entire country, whether they like it or not. And it makes me wonder, wouldn't it have just been easier to get rid of the carbon tax? how much is it going to cost to administer all the minute details of the different GST, HST exemptions, also negotiating that with the provinces? It doesn't really make sense. I think it would have been easier to give relief, long-term permanent relief to Canadians by just cutting the carbon tax.
Yeah, great points. I will also point out again, super happy people are saving some money. This is good. Like, I know people are struggling. It's right before Christmas. It's a really good thing to save money, but it's also really temporary. He's putting a sunset clause on this in February, and he's planning on hiking the tax back up in February. Good luck with that, bud. Better saddle up. Noah, what was your take on this?
Well, you brought up a great point, Chris, in that this is a temporary tax cut. Why would you make it temporary when Canadians aren't just dealing with cost of living concerns for only 2 months of the year? They're dealing with it for the entire year. And the reason why Trudeau feels as if he has to implement these measures is because his government has been contributing to a tax environment in which Canadians are being overtaxed for the cost of everyday items. You know, the carbon taxes the goal of the carbon tax is to increase the cost of energy, and Canadians have been dealing with rising energy prices for several years now, and all of a sudden he wants to do a little 2 month measure so that he can compensate for the years and years of carnage and increasing affordability concerns. This little tax cut that he's trying to deliver, it's basically swimming against a tide of increasing taxation and increasing regulation, and it's a little odd, the selection of items that the Trudeau government is choosing to exempt. Sure, they're exempting kids' clothing, but why not exempt all clothing? I'm pretty sure everyone needs clothing. If you look at some of the most vulnerable people in our country, you know, say like the homeless, they are generally adults who need clothing too. You know, they especially need socks. That's one of the most requested items at food banks. And why are they exempting print newspapers? It seems as if it's a sneaky way to help the legacy media and their dying newspaper chains. It is really odd to see not only the list of items that they're exempting, but the temporary nature of this tax cut. Why not just lower the GST for everyone on all items to ameliorate affordability concerns? It's really just because they are trying to bribe voters, especially with the $250 subsidy that they're trying to provide people.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see when those come out because they're coming. It's coming out, I think, after Christmas. So, and that's going to be leading into the budget. That's going to be leading into them putting the tax back on. So that's going to be a bit of a sticky comms situation for them to deal with. I didn't actually see in the backgrounder if this includes home heating bills because I think he would have mentioned it. I'll have to go back and check just to be fair, but to be totally fair to the NDP, as much as I yell at them every day about trying to get rid of the carbon tax on home heating, and we wish they would remember their roots, including Jack Layton, who said you should never put a carbon tax on home heating bills because it's unfair, they have consistently said that we shouldn't have the GST on home heating bills. So I'm a little bit surprised that that wasn't one of the first things out of his mouth if he did include that. And if he failed to include that on the GST exemption, that's a big miss because a lot of people are, of course, got their furnaces going because we've got winter. I've got a little bit of snow on the ground outside the house here in Lethbridge. I'm not sure what you guys have. Never mind, Cosmin. You're near Vancouver. You're just sitting there smiling. I don't need to shovel the rain.
No, snow in November is kind of crazy. It's nuts. We're still getting positive temps, so I'm glad I'm not over there in Lethbridge right now.
No,
Jeez.
no, we had to shovel this morning. All right, so I would say there is a little bit of good news because I'm trying to be positive leading into Christmas and that people will be saving some money. But the downside, of course, as you gentlemen both point out, just scrap the carbon tax or just cut the GST altogether. We were talking before the show, before we started rolling, and I remember, and a lot of our listeners will remember, when Prime Minister Stephen Harper was reducing the GST, the Liberals were kicking up a fuss. I'm also old enough to remember when Prime Minister Jean Chrétien was campaigning against the Progressive Conservatives, and he was railing against Brian Mulroney's GST, and he promised to get rid of it. Oops, they failed to keep that promise. So interesting to see the GST, something as personal and in your face as a sales tax, right in there again. And I will point out, you shouldn't be paying GST on diapers anyway. Like you shouldn't be paying GST on essentials anyway.
If I could,
These
Kris, if
go
I could
ahead.
just jump in. Sorry, I've been itching to say something. I feel
Go
like
for it.
the liberals have entered this phase where they've run out of their own ideas. They have no more original policies to propose, and they're just borrowing, nitpicking from every single party, including the Conservatives, including the NDP, and introducing, repackaging these ideas as their own. And you're seeing them take positions that used to be like held by conservatives, held by the NDP, and just repackaging them without any original plan. And I think, just going back to what I said about it being inauthentic, it doesn't come from a place where it's a long-term vision. It just seems like this cynical short-term gain. And a lot of people are talking about a potential spring election. And if this payment is coming out a few months towards that, it might very well be that bribe just to get those extra votes, potentially avoiding a crushing defeat.
Yeah, and talk about repackaging policy. It was only like about a month ago that Doug Ford announced that he's going to be sending out $200 to every adult in Ontario. So it seems as if Trudeau and his best buddy Doug Ford got together in a room and started talking about ways that they're going to make themselves popular. At least with Doug Ford, he's generally popular in this province. It's still a terrible, terrible idea to just blow out $200 to everyone else instead of giving a carbon tax, and the cost of administering such a giveaway is pretty good to be pretty large. So Trudeau probably just saw what Doug Ford was doing, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to try the same thing. Hopefully that will gain me popularity ahead of an election." But I hope Canadians are smart enough, and I think they are, to realize that this is just a vote buying. You see this in third world countries where you have these African leaders going around handing people $100 bills or whatever, and then said, "Hey, come vote for my party," or whatever. But it's happening here in Canada. It is a shame that political leaders think that Canadians are this dumb and this easy to get their it's this easy to get their votes, and it's not really addressing the long-term affordability concerns of Canadians who are dealing with bills in the thousands of dollars for filling up at the gas tank or heating their home.
Yeah, regardless of jersey color and party, I have seen every single form of government do this. They just grab the shovel and they start throwing it off the back of a truck. And as a taxpayer, I need to keep on pointing out, this is your money. Like, they just took it from you. It reminds me of this great cartoon. People might have seen it. It's a husband and wife kind of standing there. And Trudeau, in this case, it could be any politician when they do stuff like this. Trudeau is running by flinging money, like tossing money to people. And the guy says, "Oh, look, he's so generous." And the wife says, "He's got your wallet." It's a really good cartoon. Speaking of affordability and the carbon tax, did we want to move on to the lecture that we got? Okay. I did, in all seriousness, want to warn people about this next clip. It is lengthy and it's frankly infuriating and hard to listen to. I know a lot of people are struggling. About half of people now in Canada are reporting they're within $200 of not being able to cover their minimum payments on their bills. Meaning, like, they're borrowing money from friends or going into debt to pay their power bills. That, like, things are tough for so many people right now. And I wanted to put this into context before I play this next clip for you. So this is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He flew down to some global Up With People whatever conference in Brazil. I literally don't even know the name and it doesn't matter. What matters is what he said. And he was asked about the cost of the carbon tax and how people in Canada, based on all the polls and anybody you talk to, they're done. They're done. They want the carbon tax gone. But here he is at one of these global summits talking to all of his fancy global friends about the carbon tax. Listen to this.
It's really, really easy when you're in a short-term survive. I got to be able to pay the rent this month. I got to be able to buy groceries for my kids, to say, okay, let's put climate change as a slightly lower priority. And that's something that's instinctive. When the storm comes, you want to hunker down and just sort of huddle up and wait for it to blow over. We can't do that around climate change.
Yeah. Okay. So I've had to actually kind of stay calm because it made me so mad. Number one, he wouldn't know. He doesn't know. For him to dare say something like you're in survival mode trying to pay the rent, he has no experience with that. He was born very rich, literally on Christmas Day, while his father was prime minister, living at 24 Sussex. He has never had to worry about paying a bill or affording groceries. The help goes and does that. That has been the case his entire lived experience. And it wouldn't be so hard to swallow this, folks, Noah and Cosmin, if he wasn't constantly turning the screws on us and cranking up the carbon tax, which is helping to make life basics unaffordable here in Canada while not helping the environment. The carbon tax does not reduce global emissions. So this is 100% financial pain with zero environmental gain. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox, but that just ticked me off, man. Go ahead, Cosmin.
Yeah, just to put into perspective this prime minister's lifestyle, back in 2022, we did an ATIP looking exactly at the prime minister's expenses on groceries, chefs, etc. And in 1 month, they managed to spend over $12,000. Now, that is a fraction, like literally for some people, that is a fourth of what they make in an entire year. And this prime minister is just blowing taxpayer money, mind you, away on luxury goods. You know, he's shopping, he's getting deliveries from fancy bagel places, these organic bakeries, these French and Italian delis. And it's just astounding. And I don't think Canadians often get a look into the lifestyle of our prime minister beyond what he presents himself as on TV. But it's crazy. He has personal chefs. He goes through multiple chefs. He's had multiple chefs in during his term in office, and they get paid a ridiculous amount of money to cook him food. So absolutely out of touch. He doesn't understand the struggles of ordinary Canadians. And if he did, he would understand that $250 doesn't go a very long way.
No, that no longer covers even a big grocery shop for a family of four. It used to, back before the lockdowns, back before the Trudeau government. $250 would generally be for a family of four, kind of your big Saturday grocery shop, but that doesn't cover it anymore. And I needed to stress what he was saying there. He's saying that people who literally are struggling to afford food in survival mode ought not to be thinking about themselves and their children. They should be thinking about his pet carbon tax, darn it, and how it makes him look when he's here with his friends on the global stage. Even in defiance of the data, I have to continue to stress this. Even if you loved the carbon tax, even if your main concern that kept you up at night was global emissions, sorry, even if Canada ceased to exist, it wouldn't make a dent in global emissions. So his little carbon tax pet project here is doing nothing except causing us financial pain, of which he knows nothing. Sorry, go ahead, Noah. I'll let you jump in on this.
No, you make a really good point, Chris. I mean, Canada only makes up about 1.6% of global emissions worldwide. If Canada was wiped off the face of the earth, we're not going to make a dent of it in it, especially since India is trying to modernize their economy, and they're going to need a lot of energy for that. China is also doing the same with the 1.3 billion people that they have. That's already two countries that is accounting for about 2.5 billion people in the world, and we only have about 42 million in our country. So if we slash emissions to zero tomorrow, it isn't going to make much of a difference at all. And the goal that the United Nations and these world leaders who are buying into this zero emissions ploy, their claim is that they want to ensure that the world doesn't heat up by 3 degrees Celsius by 2100. It'll only heat up by 2 degrees Celsius. So if we're looking for a 1 degree Celsius change in in global warming, and Canada only makes up like under like 1% of the world population, it doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense for Canada to be going to such lengths to try and fight, climate change when A, emissions are still going up, even though the carbon tax is still in place, and B, the cost of living concerns that Canadians have already been having has been increasing. When you go to the gas pump, I'm gonna have to go there in like an hour. Yeah, I'm gonna have to pay about $1.60 per liter on my gas. It's actually insane because it was never this high before. When you go to the grocery store, you're gonna have to pay about double what you were paying back in 2019 because the Trudeau government has been just shoveling out a bunch of money out the door, and they had no concern for fiscal matters. Justin Trudeau famously said that he doesn't pay attention to monetary policy. That's not something that he thinks about. So for him, to turn around and say that, oh yeah, I care so much about the cost of living concerns of Canadians, but we still have to fight climate change. It's just so disconnected from the reality that most Canadians are facing, who are struggling to pay the bills, who are having to skip meals sometimes in order to
Mhm.
put food on the table for their children. It is really someone who, it is the words of someone who grew up rich in a posh sort of circumstances, and it doesn't understand the average experience of average Canadians.
If
Yeah,
I could just add one
go
more
ahead.
thing to what Noah's saying,
Yeah.
the most infuriating thing about this is that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and others like him ask everybody else to sacrifice except for themselves. They still continue to go on these trips, take their entire delegations with these jets to Brazil, wherever, mind you, and they refuse to sacrifice on pay. They refuse to sacrifice on all the privileges they're afforded in their positions. So it's massive hypocrisy. It just, and I think it's become so endemic to the political class that Canadians are really starting to react and recoil when they're being lectured in this way.
Yeah, to put a point on it, like I pointed out, he was born wealthy. And talk about privileged, literally the son of the prime minister at the time. They put in a pool while he was there. That always got me too. Remember a few months back when he got all huffy and said that, oh, the only people who have to pay the carbon tax are the people with indoor swimming pools and I think 3 personal cars. Say, number one, he was raised with an indoor swimming pool, so he'd know. Number two, the fact that he said 3 personal cars, because of course the help parks outside too for him. So he had to specify that they were personal cars. This is the thing, and I needed to stress the math here for anybody who forgets. And I promise we'll end the show on a good note. So stick with us. The carbon tax costs you every time you fill up your car. So if you've got a minivan, it's an extra $13 or so every time you're filling up that minivan. A pickup truck, that's costing you $20 extra just in the carbon tax every time you fill up. For the truckers who are filling up their tanks with diesel, that's an extra $200 in the carbon tax. This is just the first carbon tax. It's not including the second carbon tax or the industrial carbon tax, okay? Here in Alberta, this coming winter, the average household will have to pay out more than $400 extra in Trudeau's carbon tax. And then I can hear them right now, these ridiculous people within the Liberal Party, the Liberal government right now. You get more back than you pay in. Number one, that's not true. So anyone with a scrap of common sense understands you can't hand the Trudeau government a $20 bill and expect a 50 back with no cost to you. That's not how money works. Number two, the parliamentary budget officer has done the math over and over again, and the average Canadian is still out money net every single year, even with the rebates factored in. No matter how much they slice it, the carbon tax costs you huge money. And so for him to, like you point out, Cosmin, jet off to this fancy summit, wherever it is in Brazil, doing whatever, in order to talk about how the peasants back home should really understand how important this fight is to me, it just defies belief. But I wanted to encourage people. I understand getting mad at this. Use that fuel to write to your member of parliament, no matter what party they're a part of, and quote this and say, this, man, this is why you guys are not getting it. This is why affordability. Okay, I know things are important. The frozen bank accounts were important. Inflation is super important. We know that. But affordability is the key issue for the vast majority of Canadians right now. And for them to not get it is astonishing. And so just keep sending those emails to your MPs, no matter which party they're a part of, and you tell them, hey man or lady, this is why. You guys really need to get the message here. Do we want to go on to your neck of the woods here, Cosmin? Because you guys have, it's not even a new government. New to you? I'm not sure. Kind of a new government, not really. You have a kind of a new cabinet. They reshuffled the deck chairs there with EB's NDP government there in BC. What's happening there in BC? How big is this cabinet? How much is this costing us?
Yeah, sure. Let's run through it pretty quickly. It's the same size as EB's last cabinet, but that cabinet itself was a historically large one, larger actually than former Premier John Horgan's cabinet. And we have to realize that Horgan left the EB government with a surplus, a quite sizable surplus. And EB has managed to turn it into a record breaking deficit with very little to show for it. But as for the cabinet itself, it might be the same size, but it's actually more expensive. It's going to cost British Columbians more because the EB government, just before the election this year, gave themselves all pay raises for cabinet ministers as well as secretaries. So we have about $60,000 extra in salaries for cabinet ministers, and I think it's about 40,000 more for the secretaries. So it's going to cost British Columbians more. And some of the picks themselves, so there's been quite a few shifts. A lot of people didn't get reelected, including like the former Minister of Education, but he's shuffled some people around. Some rookies have been put into positions. A few key ones that I kept my eye on was Adrian Dix, the former health minister, who was in charge of COVID, who was in charge of dealing with the drug opioid crisis, mental health crisis. He's been moved out of that file and sent to energy. And I was talking to you about this earlier, Kris, you being from British Columbia. You recall Adrian Dix used to be the NDP leader in BC when he was in opposition. And at that time, he actually opposed the Kinder Morgan expansion, which is now known as the Trans Mountain Pipeline after it was purchased. So it gives you a sense of the priorities of this government. They're actually anti reinforcing the energy industry in this province. And the other position that I saw was he handed a spot to Christine Boyle. It's the first cabinet position for this MLA, and she used to be a Vancouver city councillor who, during the big BLM, Black Lives Matter craze, she advocated for the defunding of the police, and it actually cost Vancouver Council quite a Vancouver police force, quite a substantial amount of money in budget, which the Vancouver City Council had to recuperate after they realized what they had done and how horrible of a mistake it was by raising taxes on Vancouver residences in terms of property taxes. And she's also, just to clarify, she's been appointed in the Indigenous ministry. She's not in public safety, but she's also a proponent of the land back movement, this sort of radical wing of Indigenous activists who want to decolonize Canada, and etc. So there are some suggestions that this is more of the same, if not even more radically left than the last cabinet.
So just to be clear, did you say that Dix is now energy?
That's right. He's the Minister of Energy in British Columbia.
Wow. So for folks who aren't from BC, the fight to get the Kinder Morgan pipeline twinned, which at the time was owned by a private company, and at the time was going to employ a whole bunch of people at their own expense. That was a big fight to get that through. And I'm 99% sure that he was one of the guys who was super opposed to it at the time. And now he's the minister in charge of their energy. Just to give you guys for folks who aren't familiar with BC, to give you a perspective, John Horgan, before he became premier and before he was even an MLA, he was working in an MLA's office that was managing like natural gas. Like he actually knew a thing or two around the energy sector as far as it goes in British Columbia. To have this now switch over from having a surplus with a premier who, for whatever, at least seemed to understand energy a little bit more, now going to a massive deficit, and a minister now who was opposed to a pipeline expansion. Wow, that's you're in tough there, Cosmin. May the force be with you. Noah, did you have any thoughts on what's going on out in BC?
Yeah, I'm pretty concerned with your new energy minister, not only because of her previous experience campaigning against the fine people working in the energy sector, but also because of her mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic. It seems as if the NDP, they got one of their most zealous ministers, and then they put her in a position where
Him.
she can.
Just one sec.
Oh,
He's a
sorry, yeah.
dude. It's okay. It's a boy named Sue situation. Go ahead.
But yeah, they put one of their most radical ministers in a department that is very important. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, BC had some, it wasn't some of the most harsh restrictions in the country. I would give that award to Quebec. But the BC government definitely did not pursue a moderate course when it came to the COVID-19 pandemic. And now this minister is going to be at energy. It doesn't seem as if uh, British Columbians are going to be getting any relief when it comes to competent government. However, I would be a little bit optimistic if I were a British Columbian, because the NDP, they are holding on to power very tenuously, and if a NDP MLA or two decides to resign, if the Greens also decide to kick the bums out in whenever they want to, the BC could see themselves within another election in just very short amount of time. And I think the BC Conservatives would be really well positioned to win an election now that they have more representation in the BC legislature. Their reputation has been developing over the course of a year plus now. And going into an election when the NDP have been in government for so long now, I think a lot of British Columbians are going to want to see a change of leadership.
Cosmin,
This
sorry to put you on the spot, but are you hearing any good stuff coming from the BC Conservatives? Are they kind of sticking to their guns of things like, let's scrap the carbon tax, let's have taxpayer protection, let's fight these deficits, that sort of stuff? Like, are they sticking to what they were saying during the election? Like, are they staying organized and united? Or what are you hearing?
Yeah, it's interesting. The election was all attack, attack, attack against the BC Conservatives, both from the NDP and the legacy media here in British Columbia. But I feel like from what I'm seeing, it's only reinforced the positions of John Rustad and the BC Conservative caucus. They've sort of had an unapologetic approach. They've admitted we've made some mistakes, we've had some issues with our candidates, but they're doubling down on a lot of the solid core positions they have, including their opposition to the carbon tax, including their stress to improve public safety, to get rid of drugs off of the streets by getting rid of safe supply programs and moving people into those recovery and addiction treatment programs. But just to kind of steer the BC conversation a little bit, Noah, you were talking about how there might not be that much time left for the BC NDP. And I think that is true to some degree, because we just saw BC NDP Premier David Eby appoint a new chief of staff. And this new chief of staff conveniently used to work for Alberta NDP Premier Rachel Notley. He was actually her principal secretary. So it's interesting because if you know anything about the NDP, this is a sort of nationally syndicated party. The provincial parties are just like tentacles of this national body. And sometimes it comes across that they act like a united front. They all propose similar policies and push this national agenda towards more socialism, more radical progressivism. And it's because of this. They employ the same people, they have the same advisors, they just trade and swap these people into positions of power and authority to guide the future of the provinces they're elected in. And on the issue of the length of the term, Eby only hired this guy for 6 months, which indicates to me that he might not think he has a lot of time left before another election is called. Usually, if you hire a chief of staff, you hire them for the term or you give them a lengthier contract. But 6 months seems to me like a ridiculously short time for a new chief of staff. And there could be an election coming whenever. somebody gets sick, somebody passes away, the Greens refuse to be cooperative. It could be another election coming in British Columbia.
Somebody gets stuck at a ferry sailing. Hey,
Yeah.
weirder things have happened. Victoria is on an island.
Yeah.
I'm picturing all the hijinks now. All right, do we want to end on our happy note? Do we want to go to well, it starts with bad. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, somewhat happy.
Okay, the top line is we're paying way too much for our bureaucracy. Noah, wanted to let you take that one away.
Yeah, so when Trudeau got into office, he assumed office in a state in which the Canadian government was spending about $40 billion on the federal bureaucracy. That's still a lot, but at least it was a bit manageable. Now we are spending nearly $70 billion on our bureaucracy, going up 73% in only 9 years of as the Conservative Party would say, not after 9 years of Justin Trudeau, blah blah blah. But no, it's actually real. Like the cost of the federal bureaucracy has gone up 73,000, and the population of the federal bureaucracy has gone up by over 100,000, from 257,000 to 367,000. Now, for the increasing cost and the increasing size of our federal bureaucracy, you would expect that the federal services that we are receiving are, just so much better than what we've been getting before. That the quality is better, that we're getting more services, that the departments are being more efficient. But that is actually the opposite. Many Canadians report that the bureaucracy has not been doing their job, that the federal government is not delivering the services that they should. If you remember, when we're coming out of the pandemic, the passport offices were so crowded that you had to wait in line for several hours, maybe even 10 plus hours, just to go out and get your passport. The federal government really has not been placing a great emphasis on the quality of the federal service, but they're more than happy to spend a lot more on the federal on the bureaucracy. Now, if we look down south to our friends in the United States, they just elected President-elect Donald Trump, and his administration looks like it'll be taking a much different approach to dealing with the bureaucracy than we are doing in Canada. In Canada, we don't mind ballooning bureaucracy, while Canadians do, but our government doesn't mind. But it seems as if the federal government in the United States wants to create a department in order to make the bureaucracy a lot more efficient. They calling the department DOGE. It's acronym for Department of Government Efficiency. And Trump has appointed Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk to lead the department, to help cut down on costs that on things that the federal government doesn't need to be spending on, cutting back on jobs for people that aren't really contributing to anything whatsoever. And they're really trying to do this in order to bring down the cost of the government in the United States. So how do you guys contrast the difference between the approaches that we are taking in our respective countries?
Well, for anybody who's been waking up from a 3-week-long nap, President Trump is now President Trump again, or President-elect Trump. He won the presidency, the Senate, the House, and the popular vote. The popular vote, I think that was pretty impressive. It was, I think, by about 5 million people. So in political terms, he's got a mandate. I think technically under the US Constitution, he now has to be the dog catcher in Washington, D.C. too, because he just got so many votes. And so now he's set up this Department of Government Efficiency. I was very excited to see that they're actually, looks like they're talking to Ron Paul, who's been wanting to reduce the size and the cost of government now for so long that it's really nice to see.
Yeah, that guy's fierce.
Yeah, right. And so it's really good to see for taxpayers. And so I'm begging and hoping that we can get something like that up here in Canada. But the one thing is funny, people laugh at the DOGE thing, but people remember logos. They remember icons and images, and it does sink in. And so I really am wondering, Cosmin, what do you think our equivalent could be up here? We were having some fun earlier this week on X about this, saying what would the Canadian equivalent be of that little dog here? Oh, here, this is the tweet I threw out a few days ago. So Canada needs its own DOGE to eliminate government waste. The dog icon is taken for the Department of Government Efficiency. But what should we have? A bear? Bureaucratic Efficiency Action Regiment? What should we have? And so I link then to my friend Franco Terrazzano's piece in the Western Standard, where he goes through just a ton of government waste. And there's everything in there. There's like old people sex stories. There's sex toy shows in Germany. You paid for all of it. Like gay ghosts on podcasts that the government is producing. Like you pay for all of it. Cosmin, what do you think our icon could be that would fit seriously into an acronym for reducing the size and cost of government?
Yeah, that's a good question. There were some suggestions floated around for like moose, goose. I think goose would be good because it became a symbol during the freedom convoy, as I mentioned earlier. Perhaps like even maple, something like that could be turned into a useful acronym. But just to add on, like the genius behind this new department in the United States is that it's not only a department of efficiency, it's a department of transparency.
Yes.
Because to do any cuts to make the government more efficient, it implies you need to take an audit of exactly what's going on, the amount of money that's being spent, all of the doubling of positions where people are doing the same work or not doing any work at all. So I think that is the most crucial and positive development, is that it's going to be a lot of transparency. And Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have promised that they're going to dedicate a daily update on this audit and the transparency of the government. And that's what needs to happen in Canada. Unfortunately, Canada doesn't have as much of a tradition of small government conservatism. It is there, but it's not really written into our history like it is in the United States. And so here, I think the first step is just like getting an audit of what the government is, what the size of it is, what people are doing, how many hours are people working? Because I suspect out of an 8-hour workday or however many hours they actually mandate in the federal government, they might be working 2 hours at their desks. So that's key. I think the transparency and an audit of government comes before you can make those efficient cuts. And I think once people are aware and told exactly what the size of the government is and all of the problems within it, they will be supporting and cheering on every decision to cut. And it won't become this bogeyman of, oh, you're cutting services. No, we're cutting waste.
Yeah, if we can make smaller government and cutting government waste great again, like this will be a very special thing. That's how the Taxpayers Federation got started back in 1990. It was before the internet even existed. And it was a protest against government waste, high taxes, and too big of government. I wanted to read one out here. Moose, it was from Alex on X, said it would be the Ministry of Operational Optimization and Strategic Efficiency. So that's Moose. There was a few others here. Goose was Government Office of Operations Standards and Ethics. For folks who are commenting on the YouTube channel or whatever, like, do suggest them, because we can try to make a bit of a campaign out of this. In all seriousness, exactly to Cosmin's point, this can then get real traction and have real teeth. And we can start getting rid of the crazy amount of waste that we hear every single year. Noah, did you have a favorite, or are you hopeful that this could actually catch on up here?
Yeah, I think Goose is really good, but I do think it'll catch on because I think increasingly Canadians are looking at the amount of money that the federal government is spending and the types of services that they are receiving, the type of benefits that they're getting from the federal government, and they don't think that it is necessarily worth the cost. And if a conservative government does if the conservatives do form the next government, I think Prime Minister Polyev would look at the situation and say, "Hey, back when Harper and the Conservatives were previously running the government, they were able to bring down the size of the bureaucracy. Now, I think from 2006 to 2008 or nine, it increased, but over the last several years of the Harper government, they were actually able to bring down the size of the bureaucracy, and they didn't sacrifice government services. They weren't cutting government programs like the NDP and the Liberals like to fearmonger about. So I think there's going to be a concerted effort to do so, especially since the Polyev government, they need to get through their agenda. They want to move away from the incremental approach of the Harper government. And I think to do so, they're going to want to make sure that the government is running efficiently and that they are able to implement their policies in a quick and efficient manner. So I think that not only will the Canadian people have appetite for this, but also I think that the future government or a potential future government would have an appetite for cutting down the bureaucracy and trying to make it more efficient. Now, if that means I don't know what the acronym will be, Moose or Goose. We'll have to see. I definitely, I'm advocating for Goose because,
I like
it is an
Goose.
iconic iconic Canadian animal. Everyone knows them. Even if you're not living in Canada, sometimes you'll see a Canadian goose in maybe Florida. I don't know where they immigrate down south to in the winter, but
They land somewhere.
yeah, it's just somewhere down there. But yeah, one of those inferior countries. But at the end of the day, I think Canadians are looking forward to looking forward to the federal government running in a much more smooth manner than the Trudeau government has been able to produce.
Yeah, I like it, and we can do the talk to me goose. Like it'll work. It'll totally work. And
It
I
will.
think that like I know Mr. Polyev likes he likes acronyms, likes nicknames, that sort of stuff. I think this could have some traction. So folks, give your recommendations. You can either send them to True North, send them to the Taxpayers Federation, or just comment on the YouTube channel. But remember, this entire show, everything is off the record.
No, I think it's really funny that you said geese immigrate southward, because I'm imagining them going to like the passport office and like getting a visa and standing in line at the border.
Angrily, very impatiently
And then
standing
like
there.
the border
Hissing.
guards looking at the pictures and they all look the same.
Hey man, the cost of living concerns are getting the geese too.